I heard the banging before I even got my key in the door. 3 rhythmic thuds. Pause. 3 more. Coming from somewhere below me, deep in the house. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my suitcase right there on the porch. 2 weeks. I'd been gone for exactly 2 weeks, sitting at my mother's hospital bed in Vancouver, holding her frail hand while she fought pneumonia. And in those 14 days, something in my house had been making noise, something that shouldn't have been there. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me first. Rot. Decay. Something wrong. The banging got louder, more desperate. It was coming from the basement that didn't have a lock on it when I left. The basement that now had a heavy-duty padlock hanging from the door like some kind of nightmare I hadn't authorized. My heart was hammering so hard I could taste copper in my mouth. I grabbed a wrench from the garage. My hands were slick with sweat. The metal was cold. I broke that lock with 3 hits, and the sound of it clattering to the floor is something I still hear when I try to sleep. I yanked the door open. The darkness rushed up at me, and the smell, God, the smell, got worse. I fumbled for the light switch. When those fluorescent bulbs flickered on, I saw him, my boyfriend, James, crumpled at the bottom of the stairs like discarded trash. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His eyes were sunken so deep into his skull I barely recognized his face. He was covered in his own filth, shaking, dehydrated to the point where his skin looked like paper stretched over bone. He looked up at me and tried to speak, but nothing came out except this dry, rattling sound. I ran down those stairs so fast I nearly fell. I grabbed him. He was burning up with fever, but shaking like he was frozen. His clothes were stuck to him. He smelled like death, like he'd been left to die. When I got water to his lips, he gulped it down so desperately he choked, and then he grabbed my wrist with whatever strength he had left, and pulled me close. His breath was sour and hot against my ear, and he whispered 6 words that shattered my entire world. Alice, your dad. Then, he passed out in my arms. What do you think happened? Drop your guesses in the comments. You might be right, or completely wrong. Let me take you back. 2 weeks before that moment, before everything I thought I knew turned into a lie. My mom got sick suddenly, pneumonia. She's lived in Vancouver for 5 years, ever since the divorce. My dad stayed here in Oregon. They couldn't be in the same room without poison filling the air, so they split geography entirely. When the hospital called, I didn't think twice. I packed a bag in 20 minutes, and booked the first flight out. James, my boyfriend of 3 years, the man I thought I was going to marry, told me to go. Told me not to worry about anything. He'd handle the house. He'd handle everything. He kissed me at the door and said, "Take care of your mom. I've got this." God, I loved him for that. I trusted him completely. But I also trusted my father. That's the part that kills me now. My dad offered to check on James while I was gone. He said it would be no trouble. He lived 20 minutes away, and he'd swing by every couple of days, make sure the house was secure, maybe bring James dinner, keep him company. It seemed thoughtful. It seemed caring. My father had always been protective. Overly protective, maybe. The kind of dad who ran background checks on my high school dates. The kind who installed 3 deadbolts on my first apartment door. The kind who called twice a day just to make sure I was okay. I used to find it endearing. Annoying sometimes, sure, but it came from love. Or that's what I told myself. That's what I believed. He'd never liked James. Not from the first time they met. But he was civil. He shook his hand. He came to dinners. He never said anything outright hostile. Just little comments, little observations. He doesn't have much ambition, does he? You sure he's the right fit for you, Alice? I just want you to be with someone who's worthy of you. I brushed it off. I thought it was just typical dad stuff. The whole, no one's good enough for my daughter, cliché. I thought he'd come around eventually. I thought James would win him over with time, with patience, with proof that he loved me and treated me right. James was kind. He was gentle. He worked as a teacher. He volunteered at animal shelters on weekends. He made me laugh. He never raised his voice. He was the opposite of everything angry and controlling in my life. Maybe that's why I loved him. Maybe that's why my father hated him. Have you ever trusted someone so much that you'd never question them until you had no choice? Let me know below. When I found James in that basement, my brain couldn't process it. It kept trying to make excuses. Maybe he fell. Maybe he locked himself in by accident. Maybe this was some kind of horrible misunderstanding. But deep down, in the part of me that knew the truth before I was ready to accept it, I knew. I knew someone had done this to him on purpose. Someone had locked him down there and left him to die. I called 911. My voice didn't even sound like mine. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. They had to carry James out on a stretcher. He was conscious but barely coherent. Mumbling, hallucinating. They said if I'd come home even 1 day later, he might not have made it. Severe dehydration, kidney damage, malnutrition, infection from lying in his own waste for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. While I was holding my mother's hand, someone was torturing the man I loved in my own home. The police came next. They asked questions. I couldn't answer most of them. I was in shock. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept seeing his face. Those hollow eyes. That look of betrayal and confusion. At the hospital, they put him on IV fluids. They ran tests. They cleaned him up, and when he was stable enough to talk, a detective sat by his bed and asked him what happened. I was there, holding his hand, and he told us. His voice was hoarse and broken, but he told us everything. My father had come over the day after I left. James let him in. Why wouldn't he? It was my dad. They sat in the living room. My father seemed friendly, normal. He'd brought pizza. They ate together. They watched part of a game on TV. And then my father asked James to help him check something in the basement. Said he heard a weird noise last time he visited. Thought maybe there was a leak or a problem with the foundation. James went down first, and my father followed. That's when it happened. My father hit him. James said he didn't even see it coming. One moment they were looking at the water heater. The next moment James was on the floor, and his head was ringing and there was blood in his mouth. He tried to get up. My father hit him again. Harder. Then he dragged James to the corner, tied his hands behind his back with zip ties, and he left. Just walked up the stairs, turned off the light, shut the door, and locked it. James screamed until his voice gave out. He kicked at the door until his legs were bruised and useless. He tried to break the zip ties until his wrists bled. No one heard him. No one came. The basement had no windows. No way out. My father had left him 1 bottle of water. 1. It was gone by day 3. After that, James drank from a floor drain that had stagnant water pooling in it. He thought he was going to die down there. He thought my father was going to let him rot. And the worst part? My father came back. Twice. James heard footsteps above him. Heard someone walking around the house. He screamed for help. He banged on the ceiling with a piece of wood he'd found. And nothing. My father knew he was down there. He knew, and he did nothing. If your heart dropped right now, you're not alone. Hit the like button so I know you felt that too. The police didn't believe it at first. Or maybe they didn't want to. My father was a retired fire chief, respected in the community, a decorated veteran. He volunteered with youth sports leagues. He donated to charities. Everyone loved him. Everyone trusted him. But James had injuries. He had evidence. The zip ties had left marks so deep they scarred his wrists. There was DNA evidence. And when the police searched my house, they found my father's fingerprints on the padlock, on the light switch, at the top of the basement stairs, on the empty water bottle that had been left down there. They brought him in for questioning. And you know what he said? He denied everything. Calmly. Coldly. Said he hadn't been to my house in weeks. Said James must have done this to himself for attention. Said maybe James was trying to frame him because he knew my father disapproved of the relationship. The audacity. The sheer, shameless audacity of that man. But the evidence didn't lie. They got a warrant. They searched his house. And that's when they found the journal. A composition notebook tucked in the back of his office drawer. Pages and pages of his thoughts about James, about me, about how James was manipulating me, poisoning me against my family, how he wasn't good enough, how he was weak, how I deserved better, how he, my father, needed to protect me, even if I didn't understand, even if I fought him, even if I hated him for it. He wrote that he'd been planning it for months, waiting for the right opportunity. When I called about my mom, he saw his chance. He wrote, 2 weeks should be enough. Either he'll break and leave on his own, or he won't survive. Either way, Alice will be free. Free. He thought locking my boyfriend in a basement to die was setting me free. The detective showed me the journal. She asked if I wanted to read it. I said no. Then I said yes. Then I read 3 pages and vomited into a trash can. Because this wasn't a stranger. This wasn't some random monster. This was my father. The man who taught me to ride a bike. Who walked me down the aisle at my college graduation because I didn't have anyone else. The man who called me every Sunday just to hear my voice. And he had written, in his own handwriting, a plan to murder the person I loved. Be honest if you were in my place. Would you confront your own family, or let the police handle it? I went to see him. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to hear him say it. Maybe I needed to look him in the eyes and see the monster he'd become. They let me into the interrogation room. He was sitting there in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. But when he saw me, he smiled. He actually smiled. Like we were meeting for coffee. Like he hadn't just tried to kill someone. I sat down across from him, and I asked one question. Why? And he leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and said, because I love you. I felt something break inside me. Not sadness, not even shock anymore. Rage. Pure, burning, unfiltered rage. I told him that wasn't love. I told him love doesn't destroy, love doesn't torture, love doesn't lock innocent people in basements and leave them to die in their own filth. And he shook his head. Like I was a child who didn't understand. He said, you don't see it now. But you will. He was taking you away from me. He was changing you. You stopped calling as much. You stopped visiting. He made you weak. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to hurt him the way he'd hurt James. But instead, I just stared at him. And I said, you didn't lose me because of James. You lost me because of you. Because you're not my father anymore. You're just a man who committed a crime. And I hope you rot for it. He didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. He just said, you'll forgive me eventually. You always do. That's when I stood up. I looked at him one last time. And I said, no, I won't. I walked out of that room, and I never looked back. If you've ever seen someone justify cruelty as love, drop a love emoji. I want to see how many of us understand that kind of pain. The trial took 8 months. 8 months of depositions and testimonies, and reliving the worst moment of my life over and over again. James had to take the stand. He had to describe what it felt like to be trapped in the dark, starving, thinking he was going to die alone. He cried. I cried. The jury cried. My father sat there with no expression, like he was watching a weather report. His lawyer tried to argue temporary insanity, tried to paint him as a grieving, overprotective father who had a mental breakdown, but the journal proved it was premeditated. The evidence proved it was intentional. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. They came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Attempted murder, kidnapping, assault. The judge sentenced him to 22 years in prison. He'll be in his 80s when he gets out. If he gets out. When the sentence was read, I waited for something. Relief. Maybe. Closure. But all I felt was empty. Because nothing about this felt like winning. My father was going to prison. The man who raised me. The man I thought would always protect me. And James, even though he survived, he wasn't the same. He had nightmares. He couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. He couldn't be alone in our house. He looked at me sometimes like he was waiting for me to turn into my father. Like the poison was hereditary. We tried therapy. We tried to move past it. But some things break you in ways that don't heal. We're not together anymore. He said he loved me, but he couldn't separate me from what happened. And I understood. I hated it, but I understood. What would justice look like for you if this happened to someone you love? Tell me what you think is fair. It's been 2 years since that day. 2 years since I broke that lock and found him. I don't live in that house anymore. I couldn't. Every room felt contaminated. I sold it and moved across the state, started over. My mother recovered, thank God. But when I told her what my father did, she wasn't surprised. She said, he'd always had a darkness in him. A need to control. That's why she left. She said she tried to warn me, but I wasn't ready to hear it. She was right. I visit James sometimes. We're not romantic anymore. But we're something. Survivors. Maybe. He's doing better. He got a dog. Started running. He doesn't talk about what happened unless he has to. I don't blame him. I don't talk about it much either. Except now. Except to all of you. Because I need people to understand something. The people who hurt you the most aren't always strangers. They're not always obvious villains. Sometimes they're the ones who say they love you. The ones who claim they're protecting you. The ones who use your trust as a weapon. My father believed, genuinely believed, that what he did was right, that he was saving me, and that terrifies me more than anything else. Because it means love, real or imagined, can be twisted into justification for almost anything. I've learned to recognize the signs now. The control disguised as care. The possessiveness disguised as protection. The isolation disguised as intimacy. If someone says they love you, but tries to cut you off from the world, that's not love. If someone says they're protecting you but hurts the people you care about, that's not protection. And if someone makes you feel like you owe them your autonomy because of what they've done for you, run. Run and don't look back. But let me tell you about the parts I haven't shared yet. The parts that still wake me up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat, heart racing. The details that make this whole nightmare even worse. When the police forensic team went through my house, they found things I wish I could unknow. They found that my father had been in and out of my house at least 5 times during those 2 weeks. 5 times. He had a key I didn't know about, a copy he must have made years ago. They found his coffee mug in my sink, washed and put away. They found food missing from my refrigerator. He'd been coming over, making himself comfortable, eating my food, sitting in my living room, while James was dying in the basement below him. The detective told me they found evidence that my father had sat at my kitchen table and done a crossword puzzle. A crossword puzzle. While a man suffered and begged for help just feet below him. The casual cruelty of that detail still makes my stomach turn. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't conflicted. He was comfortable, at peace with what he'd done. When they analyzed the timeline, they figured out that my father had been there the day before I came home. He'd walked through my house, checked to make sure everything looked normal, and then he left. He knew I was coming back the next day. He knew James had been without water for nearly 2 weeks, and he just left him there. Left him to be found by me. Or not found at all. The police think he was hoping James would be dead by the time I got home, that he could play the concerned father, help me discover the body, comfort me through my grief, and never face consequences. He'd miscalculated how long a human body could survive under those conditions. James is stronger than my father gave him credit for. Stronger than anyone gave him credit for. The medical reports were brutal to read. James had lost 31 pounds. 31 pounds in 14 days. His kidneys had started to fail. He had pressure sores from lying on concrete. He had frostbite on his toes because the basement was unheated, and we'd had a cold snap that week. Frostbite, in addition to everything else. The infection in his wrist from the zip ties had spread into his bloodstream. He was septic when I found him. The doctor told me that James's body had started to shut down. That he was maybe 12 hours from complete organ failure when the paramedics got to him. 12 hours. I nearly lost him by half a day. If my flight had been delayed, if I'd stopped for coffee on the way home from the airport, if I'd decided to rest before unpacking, he would have died, and I would have found a corpse instead of a person. My father planned that. He sat down and planned for the man I loved to die slowly and painfully in my basement. And then he went about his life like it was nothing. The journal entries weren't just about James. There were pages about me too. About how I'd changed since meeting James. How I'd become defiant and distant. How I'd stopped asking for my father's advice on every decision. How I'd chosen James over family dinners. How I'd started building a life that didn't center around my father's needs and wants. He wrote that I used to tell him everything, and now I had secrets. He wrote that James had stolen me, that I wasn't his little girl anymore, and he blamed James for that. Not me, never me. In my father's twisted logic, I was a possession that had been taken. Not a person who had grown up and fallen in love, not an adult making her own choices. I was a thing. And James was the thief. That's what makes me angriest. Not just what he did, but why he did it. He couldn't accept that I was my own person. He couldn't let me go. So he tried to eliminate the obstacle. Like James was nothing more than a problem to be solved. Do you know what it's like to realize your entire childhood was a lie? Every good memory I have is now contaminated. Every time my father told me he loved me, I have to wonder what he meant by that. Was it love? Or was it ownership? When he scared away boyfriends in high school, was that protection? Or was that control? When he showed up unannounced at my college apartment, was that concern? Or was that surveillance? I've had to go back through my entire life and reassess every moment, every gesture, every word. And the worst part is that I can't trust my own memories anymore, because some of them still feel good, some of them still feel like love. I remember him teaching me to swim, being patient while I clung to his neck, terrified of the water. I remember him staying up all night with me when I had the flu, bringing me soup, putting cold washcloths on my forehead. I remember him crying at my college graduation, telling me how proud he was. Were those moments real? Or were they just part of the same sickness that led him to lock a man in a basement? I don't know. I'll never know. And that ambiguity is its own kind of torture. My therapist says that people are complex, that my father could have genuinely loved me in some capacity, while also being profoundly disturbed and dangerous, that both things can be true at once. But I don't want both things to be true. I want it to be simple. I want him to be a monster I can hate cleanly. Or I want him to be the father I thought he was, and for this to all be a nightmare I can wake up from. But life isn't that neat, people aren't that simple, and I'm left holding all these contradictions, with no way to reconcile them. James tried to forgive him. Did I mention that? In the hospital, after everything, James said he didn't want to press charges. He said he just wanted to forget it happened and move on. The police told him it didn't matter, that the state was pressing charges regardless, but James meant it. He actually tried to have compassion for the man who tortured him. I couldn't understand it. I still can't. When I asked him why, he said, because hating him won't undo what happened. And your father is sick. He needs help, not punishment. That's the kind of person James is. Was. I don't know if he's still that person after everything. How could he be? But in that moment, lying in a hospital bed, IVs in both arms, he tried to find empathy for his abuser, and I hated him a little for it. Not because he was wrong, but because I couldn't do the same. I wanted my father to suffer. I wanted him to feel every ounce of pain he'd inflicted. I wanted him to know what it's like to be helpless, and terrified, and abandoned. I wanted revenge, not understanding. And James's forgiveness felt like a betrayal of that rage. We fought about it. Our first real fight in 3 years happened in a hospital room, while he was still recovering from almost being murdered. I screamed at him. I told him he was being weak, that my father didn't deserve forgiveness, that what he'd done was unforgivable. And James just looked at me with those sad, sunken eyes and said, I'm not forgiving him for his sake. I'm forgiving him for mine. Because I can't carry this hate around for the rest of my life. It'll kill me worse than the basement did. He was right. But I couldn't hear it then. I was too angry. At my father. At James. At myself for not seeing the signs. At the universe for letting this happen. I wanted someone to pay. And when James refused to join me in that anger, I felt alone. The trial was worse than I can describe. My father's lawyer tried to make James look unstable. They dug into his past, found out he'd been on antidepressants in college, tried to suggest he was suicidal, and had locked himself in the basement as a cry for help. They pointed out that he had a key to the house, that he could have left at any time. Never mind the zip ties. Never mind the medical evidence. Never mind the journal. They tried to paint James as a liar, and my father as a victim of circumstance, and some people believed it. I watched members of my extended family sit behind my father in court, my uncle, my cousin, people I'd known my whole life. They wore shirts with my father's picture on them. They whispered about how James must have seduced me, turned me against my family. They looked at me like I was the traitor, like I was the one who'd done something wrong by believing the evidence over blood loyalty. One of them cornered me in the courthouse bathroom. My aunt. She grabbed my arm and said, Your father loves you. How can you do this to him? I stared at her, and I said, He locked my boyfriend in a basement for 2 weeks. He tried to kill him. And she said, Well, maybe he had a good reason. I walked away before I did something I'd regret. But her words stayed with me. Maybe he had a good reason. That's what she said. Like there's any reason good enough. Like love or protection or fear could justify torture. That's when I realized how deep the sickness went. It wasn't just my father. It was a whole way of thinking. A whole system that prioritizes family loyalty over morality. That excuses violence when it's done by someone you're supposed to love. That blames victims for making their abusers uncomfortable. I cut them all off. Every single one who defended him. I changed my number. Blocked them on social media. Moved without telling them where. Some people called me cruel for that. Said I was throwing away family over a disagreement. A disagreement, that's what they called. Attempted murder. A disagreement. I don't regret it. Not for a second. The sentencing hearing was the last time I saw my father in person. He was given a chance to make a statement before the judge handed down his sentence. I thought maybe he'd apologize. Maybe he'd show some remorse. Maybe he'd finally admit what he'd done and why. He stood up, looked right at me, and said, "Alice, I hope someday you'll understand that everything I've ever done has been because I love you more than life itself. I'm sorry you can't see that now. But I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to come back to me." Not an apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what he'd done to James. Just a declaration of his own feelings, and an expectation that I'd eventually come around. The judge didn't hide her disgust. She told my father that his statement demonstrated a complete lack of insight into his actions, that his so-called love was possessive, destructive, and criminal, that he'd shown no remorse, and therefore deserved no leniency. 22 years, she could have given him less. The sentencing guidelines suggested 15 to 20, but she gave him 22, and I was grateful. Not happy. Not satisfied. Just grateful that someone in authority had seen him for what he was, and acted accordingly. When they led him out of the courtroom, he looked back at me one more time. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He just looked confused. Like he genuinely couldn't understand why everyone was making such a big deal out of this. Like he was the victim of a massive misunderstanding. That look haunts me. Because it was real. He really doesn't get it. He really believes he was right. After the trial, I thought I'd feel better. I thought there'd be some sense of closure or relief, but there wasn't. James was still broken. My family was still fractured. My father was in prison, but that didn't undo any of the harm, and I was left trying to pick up pieces of a life I didn't recognize anymore. James and I tried to stay together. We really did. We went to therapy, individual and couples. We talked about trauma and healing and forgiveness. We made plans for the future. But the foundation was cracked. Every time he looked at me, I saw the question in his eyes. Every time I touched him, he flinched. Not always. Not obviously. But I felt it. The hesitation. The fear. And I couldn't blame him. Because I was my father's daughter. I had his blood. His DNA. What if I had his sickness too? What if one day I woke up, and the same darkness was in me? James swore he didn't think that. But I thought it. Every single day. I looked in the mirror and searched for signs of my father's face. I monitored my thoughts for anything controlling or possessive. I second-guessed every emotion, every impulse, every decision. It was exhausting. And it poisoned everything good we tried to build. We broke up on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. No big fight. We just sat on the couch in the new apartment I'd rented and admitted that we were holding on to something that had already died. He cried. I didn't. I think I'd run out of tears by then. He told me he'd always love me, that none of this was my fault, that he hoped I'd find happiness, and I believed him. But it didn't change anything. We were still over. My father had won after all. Not the way he'd intended. But he'd destroyed our relationship just as thoroughly as if James had died in that basement. I don't know if I'll ever have a normal relationship again. I've tried dating. It never goes well. Either I'm too guarded and push people away, or I'm too vigilant and smother them with anxiety about their safety and intentions. I can't find the middle ground. I can't trust my own judgment. Because I trusted my father. I loved him, and he was a monster the whole time. If I couldn't see that, how can I see anything clearly? My therapist says I'm being too hard on myself, that I was a child, then a young adult, conditioned to see my father a certain way, that I couldn't have known. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like I should have seen the signs. The way he talked about my mother after the divorce. The way he scared off every boy I ever brought home. The way he always needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. The way he sulked when I didn't call him back immediately. The way he made every conversation about him and his feelings. The signs were there. I just didn't want to see them. And James paid the price for my willful blindness. I know that's not rational. I know that's trauma talking. But knowing something intellectually doesn't make it feel less true. I carry guilt, like a weight in my chest. Guilt for bringing James into my life. Guilt for trusting my father. Guilt for not coming home sooner. Guilt for surviving this with less damage than James did. Survivor's guilt, my therapist calls it. But it feels more complicated than that. Some nights I dream about the basement. In the dreams, I'm the one locked down there. I'm the one in the dark, screaming for help that never comes. And when I hear footsteps above me, I feel relief. Someone's here. Someone will help me. But then the footsteps walk away, and I realize the person above me knows I'm here, knows I'm suffering, and doesn't care. I wake up gasping, convinced I can smell the rotten waste. It takes me hours to calm down. Other nights, I dream that I'm my father, that I'm the one locking someone away. And in the dream, it makes sense. It feels right. Like I'm protecting something precious. And I wake up horrified, convinced that I'm capable of the same evil. Those dreams are worse than the first kind, because they suggest that the monster isn't just something external. It's something inside me too. Inherited. Inevitable. I've asked my therapist if evil is genetic. She said no. She said behavior is learned, not inherited. That I have a choice in who I become. But I'm not sure I believe her, because my father chose evil, and I'm his daughter. What if I make the same choice one day, without even realizing it? What if everyone I love is in danger just by being near me? These thoughts are irrational. I know that. But they're also persistent. They color everything. I don't let myself get too close to anyone anymore. It's safer that way. For them, and for me. James sent me a letter last year. It came out of nowhere. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. He wrote that he'd been thinking about me, that he wanted me to know he was okay, that he'd met someone new, and was taking things slow, but felt hopeful for the first time since the trial. He said he didn't blame me for what happened, that he never had, that he hoped I'd forgive myself because I didn't do anything wrong. He said he still thought about me fondly, that what we had was real and good, even if it ended badly. He said he hoped I was healing. That last part broke something open in me, because I'm not healing, not really. I'm surviving. I'm functioning. I go to work. I pay my bills. I see my therapist every week. But I'm not healing. There's a difference. Healing implies progress, implies that someday, I'll be whole again. And I don't feel like that's possible. Too much was taken. Too much was broken. I'm like a vase that's been shattered and glued back together. I might look okay from a distance, but I'm fragile, and I'm full of cracks. I didn't write back to James. I wanted to. I wanted to tell him I was happy for him, that he deserved love and peace and every good thing. But I couldn't find the words. And part of me worried that any contact from me would contaminate his new life, that I'd bring the darkness with me, so I kept my distance. It was the kindest thing I could do. Sometimes love means letting go completely, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. My mother and I are closer now. That's one good thing that came from this nightmare. She understands in a way no one else can. She lived with my father for 15 years. She saw the warning signs long before I did, and she got out. I asked her once why she didn't fight harder for custody. Why she let me spend so much time with him after the divorce. She said she tried. But my father was respected, connected. He had lawyers and character witnesses and a spotless public record, and she was labeled as bitter and vengeful, a woman scorned. The court gave him joint custody, and she didn't have the resources to fight it, so she did the best she could. She stayed in my life. She called every week. She visited when she could. And she waited for me to see the truth on my own. She said she knew if she pushed too hard, I'd side with him out of loyalty, that she had to let me come to my own conclusions. I don't know if she was right to do that, but I understand why she did. And I don't blame her anymore. We talk almost every day now. She's the only family I have left. The only person who knew me before all this, and still loves me after, that's worth everything. She tells me I'm strong, that I'm a survivor, that I'll get through this. I want to believe her. Some days I do, most days I don't, but I keep trying. That's all I can do. Keep trying, keep breathing, keep putting one foot in front of the other. Even when it feels pointless. Even when the weight of it all feels crushing. I didn't ask for this story. I didn't want it. But it's mine now. And if sharing it helps even one person recognize the danger before it's too late, then maybe, some part of this nightmare will mean something. Sometimes the ones who claim to protect you are the ones you need protecting from. I learned that the hardest way possible. I hope you never have to. If you made it here, type, "Justice isn't revenge, it's self-respect" in the comments so I know you stayed till the end.